Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, I'll be speaking about the partial mobilization announced earlier today by President Vladimir Putin in his speech. This partial mobilization was further defined to include 300,000 Russian reservists, as according to Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu of the Russian Federation. The 300,000 soldiers will undergo a specified training based on the experience of the Russian armed forces in this war. So they will take and pick officers in this war who will return to Russia to train 300,000 Russian reservists to be included in this war. The current number of Russian soldiers in Ukraine is about 200,000 soldiers. That would bring the total number to 500,000, which would equalize the amount of troops fighting on either side of this war. So the numerical advantage of the Ukraine armed forces will disappear. In this speech, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu talked about the casualties of either side during this war. He mentions that Ukraine has suffered upwards of 100,000 casualties throughout this war, while the Russian Federation had only suffered up to 6,000 casualties. This does not include the LDR and DPR soldiers as well as the Wagner PMC. Nor does it include the Chechens. They also speak about the referendums that will take place in the next week. If the regions, which include Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk, if they vote to join in together with Russia, the armed forces of these areas, the People's Militia of the DPR and the LPR, will be incorporated into the Russian army, and they will also be included in this war. They'll change it from 500,000 Russian soldiers to 600,000 to 700,000, depending on how many militia they have. But this will completely change the equipment that the militias are going around with. Currently, because they are not Russian armed forces, they are currently equipped with lesser equipment than the Russian armed forces. They have old generation small arms, they have older tanks, the T-64s, and so on. However, if they do get incorporated with the Russian army, they will receive T-70s, they will receive T-80s, they will receive T-90s, similar to the Russian soldiers. Also, with the partial mobilization, there is a full mobilization of Russian equipment. That means they will include all of their best equipment and they will not hold back in resupplying all the soldiers in this war. They have enough equipment to supply the 600,000 soldiers that they would need to supply. And it will also mean a complete and utter mobilization of the Russian Air Force, who will use their Air Force to the max capacity, unlike we have seen so far in the war. Currently, the amount of air raids being done on a daily basis is about 300, but in the future, that number can reach 1,000 to 2,000 every day. They have the capacity to mobilize 1,000 planes. However, so far, the number seems to be around 600, and a single plane can do more than one air raid every day. That means a daily basis of 1,200 to 1,800, if they do manage to operate at max capacity. So what will happen right now? First, they will fight and do everything to defend the four regions, which is the Luhansk People's Republic, the Donetsk People's Republic, Zaporizhia region, and Kherson region. Kherson region also includes the occupied Mykolaiv region that the Russians have managed to occupy of Mykolaiv. That means that they will incorporate that into the Kherson region or the Kherson People's Republic or Russia, if that is the case with the referendums that will take place in a week. So they will try to hold the line as best as they can and incorporate it into Russia, after which the Ukrainians will be forced to either withdraw and not fight them, otherwise it will be as if they were engaging in war inside of Russia according to Russian law, or they will have to fight, and that will give Russia the excuse they need to fully mobilize everything they want to do, as they will have their excuse within their own country to do everything they need to do to win this war, because it would then be a war between Russia and Ukraine. So for how long do they need to hold the line before the 300,000 reservists arrive to Ukraine? My estimate seems to be around November, as everything aligns to that month. Militarily speaking, November is the best month for the Russians to engage in large-scale offensive operations, because that is the start of the winter month. Because the end of November is just before the winter starts, which would freeze the ground and make it possible for the Russian army, as well as rivers having low levels of water and the ground generally being hard, which allows them to transfer heavy equipment across the Ukrainian fields during that time. But also the fact that the soldiers that they are mobilizing now are soldiers who have been training since November 2021, as that is when they changed the laws of conscription. That is when they changed the laws of reserve, because in November 2021 was when the Russian Federation changed the laws of the reservists, forcing them to train every month for a year from November 2021 to November 2022. On top of the terrain being suitable in November, it is also possible for the Russians to transfer the amount of equipment and train the 200,000 soldiers within that time frame of 2 months. So in the next 2 months, the Russians will try to hold the line as best as they can, while the Ukrainians will try to do as much as they can to interrupt these referendums, as well as push onwards, occupying the territory that they need to retake for them to defeat the Russians in this war. While the Russians will do all they can to hold the line and buy time for the 300,000 reservists to enter the battlefield and allow them to participate and give the Russians the upper hand in this war. So generally speaking, that is the goals of the Russian Federation right now. They want to hold the line, after which we will see them trying to mobilize their forces in the region of the Donbass to allow them to fully occupy the whole region. So what they will do is most likely they will push their troops into this northern area, maybe reoccupy Izium from the north, after which they will push on to Barvinkov and Pokrovsk in the south and occupy it as we saw Western media suggest earlier on in the war. However, the Russians didn't have enough manpower to conduct such a large-scale operation. However, they would if they have the 300,000 extra reservists that will arrive by the end of the year. After which we will see them conducting operations along the Dnieper River, pushing northwest to completely occupy all of the Zaporizhia region, and pushing northwest towards Dnipro, cutting off every passable area of the Dnieper River in the south. And they will try to push onwards to Poltava and cut off Kharkiv from the north and the south by reaching Poltava and taking all the passable areas in the Dnieper River, allowing the Russians to completely cut off supply to the eastern area, allowing the Russians to occupy Kharkiv as well. After which they will push northwards and occupy the whole east of Ukraine, and possibly also blow up the bridges on the Dnieper River with their increased use of the Russian Air Force. With this, they will be able to push westwards from across Zaporizhia and Dnipro, but also push into Ukraine from the north from Belarus. This will allow them to take the rest of the country. With the new mobilization of 300,000 additional Russian soldiers, they are now upping their goals to include all of Ukraine rather than their original goals of just the Donbass region. Then they upped their goals to include Zaporizhia, Kherson and Kharkiv. But now that the situation has changed again and they need to mobilize a lot more troops, they will definitely be upping their goals of this operation to include all of Ukraine, because they wouldn't be including this many soldiers if they didn't have goals at that level. They want to completely destroy the Ukrainian military and make them unable of conducting another offensive operation ever again, and that would be by occupying the full country. Now, the reaction of the West is still to be seen. There's two options here. Either they will go all in supplying Ukraine, double down on Russia, which would include main battle tanks of the NATO forces, F-16 fighter jets, F-15, This will include main battle tanks of NATO and fighter jets from NATO. This would mean that the Ukrainian armed forces would be a fully armed NATO country according to equipment and training of its soldiers. But supplying all of that equipment in 2 months would be very difficult, which is why I think they will return to option number one, which would be to stop supplying Ukraine further because of the threats of the Russian Federation of nuclear warfare if the West continues to support Ukraine in a matter that threatens Russian territorial integrity as well as national sovereignty. which is up for debate what it actually means. It could also include, for example, Kherson. If Kherson is taken and this referendum goes through, that would be threatening Russian territorial integrity, which would justify using nukes according to Russian nuclear doctrine. So the situation is generally very difficult for the Ukrainians right now, as they are on a heavy, as the clock is ticking and the situation seems to be worsened. As the clock is ticking and the situation worsens every second that passes from now until the end of the war, as Russia has now taken off their gloves and is now fighting at full capacity of their military. That is going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.